Hello and welcome to Retrofit Basics. This is Unit 1, Context and Key Principles. I'm Harriet Sansom and I'm from the Centre for Sustainable Energy. We are a charity that has for the last 40 years been supporting people and organisations across the UK to tackle the climate emergency and end the suffering caused by cold homes. Retrofit Basics is brought to you by CSC's Future-Proof and Communities teams. I'm in the communities team and we help communities and local councils to understand energy issues and set priorities and put plans into action to cut carbon emissions and tackle fuel poverty. And the Future-Proof team helps homeowners and builders in the southwest of England to carry out energy-saving home improvements and refurbishments. Retrofit Basics, it aims to introduce the basics of low carbon retrofit and how people can help progress retrofit activities in their communities. So we see the 3 units that make up Retrofit Basics as beneficial for those who are interested in low carbon retrofit. You might have a bit of knowledge or a kind of basic level of knowledge and you would like to learn more, and also that you'd like to support others in your community to take part in retrofit activities. You might be a member of a local community or environmental group. You might be a local faith leader or counsellor, or you might be a local community development worker. So there's a whole range of different people that this could be appropriate for. And the 3 units that make up Retrofit Basics they're not certified and they're not aimed for people who already have a strong understanding of retrofit and are looking, for example, to become an assessor or involved in the delivery of retrofit. There are lots of great courses already available in that space, such as delivered by the Carbon Co-op or AECB. So if you fit into that box, then please have a look at the Carbon Co-op website. So this project is part funded by the UK government through the UK Community Renewal Fund. And Retrofit Basics is made up of 3 units. Unit 1, which covers broader context and key principles. Unit 2, which covers retrofit measures and technologies. And Unit 3, where we'll be looking at the activities that you can do to start engaging others in your community on retrofit and making energy efficiency improvements on their homes. So this is Unit 1. And for this session, we'll be looking at the broader context and challenges to retrofit in the UK, some of the key principles of retrofit activities, how householders can go about understanding what they can do in their home through retrofit surveys and assessments, and then some of the funding opportunities that are available for householders. So just starting off, we'll just remind ourselves what retrofit is. So energy retrofit is the renovation of an existing home or building in order to reduce its energy consumption. So that's the kind of overarching definition of retrofit. So just focusing on why are we talking about retrofit? Why is it so important? So because buildings are the largest source of global greenhouse gas emissions, and the UK situation really reflects that. So we can see that approximately 18% of emissions in the UK are from buildings, and we need to improve our buildings to reduce how much energy is being used if we're going to reach our UK net zero targets. However, most of the buildings that we need to tackle already exist. So there are regulations in place to ensure that new buildings meet high standards, but most of our building stock are existing buildings. So that's why retrofitting the existing stock is so vital. And when we think about why retrofitting will actually reduce energy demand, if we look in how energy is used in a home, we can see from this diagram that heating alone is responsible for, so space heating is responsible for 61% of the energy demand or energy use in an average home, and then water heating is 23%. So together that makes up 84% of domestic energy use. And if we look across the UK, heating alone results in a staggering 10% of the UK's carbon footprint. So reducing the heat demand of buildings, number one, and then actually decarbonising the heat supply are kind of the two really critical areas that we can tackle in order to achieve our net zero emission targets. And especially at the community level, say, for example, if we look at the diagram of where all the different emissions come from, there are things like deforestation, agriculture, industry. When we're kind of community actors wanting to make change in our community, some of those bigger areas can feel quite difficult to have influence over. But in terms of tackling the emissions from our buildings, that's definitely something that we can address at the community level and at the household level. So in terms of the action that you can take at the local level, addressing energy use in buildings needs to be up there at the top of your kind of priority lists. And hopefully that's why you're here. So alongside the urgent need to actually mitigate climate change, improving the energy performance of our buildings brings so many other benefits. And actually talking about those benefits when you are engaging people in your community is a really good way to engage a kind of variety of people, because for some people, they won't want to retrofit their homes primarily to reduce the home's carbon footprint. It might be, for example, to improve comfort or to reduce their bills, which is something that we'll all be thinking about at the moment. So a key benefit of kind of retrofitting our homes is reducing energy bills, so reducing the amount of energy that our home demands. And that in turn, for households that are vulnerable to fuel poverty or which are already fuel poor, reducing the amount of energy that they need to pay for will help tackle fuel poverty. That's like one of the key ways in which we can tackle fuel poverty. And we know that currently we're in an energy crisis with the price of energy having gone up a lot. So this graph shows what our predicted bills were going to have been before the energy price guarantee came in. So around now, the energy bills were predicted to be about 3,300, and then in January, 3,600. And with the energy price guarantee, that does limit the bill on average to 2,500 for the year, but that is already 2.5 times what we were paying just about a year ago. So it's a scary time, and retrofitting our homes is a really key way in which we can increase resilience of homes to future price rises. And when we think about reducing our bills, it's also good to have a sense of just how much of an impact some of those retrofit measures can have. This is really good information to have when you're engaging people in your community. So this is typical energy bill savings through loft insulation. And this information is from the Energy Saving Trust website. And we can see that this is for a home that didn't have any loft insulation. And if they do install loft insulation, for example, for a detached house, you can have energy bill savings of almost £600. Lots of houses will already have loft insulation, but even making sure that that's topped up to the current recommended level, you're still looking at bill savings of, for example, around £55 for a detached house. So it's still significant over the year. Again, if we look at potential energy bill savings from floor insulation, these are still significant. When we look at how much our bills are going up, these changes can make a real difference to householders. Reducing energy bills from solid wall insulation, this brings with it a really big potential to reduce energy bills. So we can see here from a detached house, it's up to £930 from an annual bill. So reducing energy bills and tackling fuel poverty are two of the key benefits of retrofitting our homes, but there are other benefits too. So job creation. So if we are to meet our net zero targets, we need to be retrofitting a huge number of homes quite rapidly over the next decade. And that in itself brings with it a huge number of jobs, both new jobs, but also the ability for people to retrain. Maybe, for example, people who are in older industries that are declining. This creates a huge opportunity for skills and jobs. And the New Economics Foundation said that with our plan to retrofit 8.7 million homes by 2023, that could create in itself 500,000 new jobs, as well as reduce carbon emissions by 21% and household bills, of course. So there's huge job and skill creation. Another benefit is just a reduction in health costs and cold-related deaths. So in terms of health costs, it's estimated that the cost of poor housing in the UK costs the NHS alone 1.4 billion a year. And that's from Public Health England. And in terms of death, 8,500 people died in England and Wales last winter due to cold homes. So retrofitting our homes has the benefit of both reducing the cost in the NHS and reducing the amount of cold-related deaths. And then, of course, the overall benefit of just improved quality of life. In retrofitting your homes, you make your home a more comfortable place to be in. So improved quality of life is a really key benefit. So those are all the reasons for why we should be retrofitting our homes. But we know that the scale of the challenge is huge in terms of the number of homes that we need to retrofit and the degree to which we need to retrofit them. So there are 27 million existing homes in the UK, and we need to retrofit about 25 million of them. So it's a staggering figure. But of course, it doesn't mean that all of those properties need the same level of improvement. Some will need more and some will need less. So if we think about that, the degree to which we need to be retrofitting all of the homes, this figure here shows where our homes sit in terms of their energy efficiency. So down the left-hand side, the different letters, they are based on what we call a SAP rating, and that's the energy performance of the home. And you might have heard of an EPC, an Energy Performance Certificate, which many homes have. And the Energy Performance Certificate will tell you what your home's SAP rating is. And to make it easy for us to understand, it's on a scale of A to G. So these are all of the homes in the UK, so where they sit on the SAP scale. And we can see that the majority are around C and D, which is encouraging. However, there are still a very large number, even though the percentage-wise is quite small, there's a large number of homes that are still in the very low energy efficiency bands of E, F, and G. And we need to move as many of those up into the higher efficiency bands as possible. For some, it won't be possible for them to meet the highest bands of A and B. For example, they might be heritage homes which have constraints on what improvements can be made to the building. But we need to move as many of those low efficiency houses up into A, B, and C. And some of the houses that are in the C and D bands, we need to move them up into the A and B. So just before we think about some of the overarching principles of retrofit, it's also good to have a bit of an understanding of what some of the challenges are within retrofit, more at the system scale, because that in itself, whilst those challenges are at the system scale, those come down to impact upon householders' ability to make retrofit changes to their home. So a key one is a policy void. So we do have policies in place to push for the retrofit of homes. We have the Future Home Standard. This is the government's kind of recent standard that they are putting in place to require carbon emissions produced by new homes to be 75 to 80% lower than those built to current standards. However, this isn't coming into effect until 2025. And this is a quote from the Committee on Climate Change in terms of the government's failure to bring in a zero carbon home standard more quickly, both in terms of new homes, but also existing homes. So the Committee on Climate Change said the failure to set out a clear strategy for insulating existing homes is a shocking gap in policy. So not only does the Future Home Standard not come in until 2025, it's also not yet at the zero carbon homes level. So a delay in putting a strong policy framework in place means that homes built recently will have to be retrofitted further down the line in order to meet more stringent targets. And there was a previous target to ensure all homes were built to a zero carbon home standard that was going to come into effect in 2016, but that was dropped by the government in 2015. And the Future Home Standard, which is the equivalent, will only come into force in 2025. So at the moment, we don't have a strong enough policy framework to really be pushing strong retrofit of both new and existing buildings. Of course, existing buildings where changes are made to them do have to comply to the building regulations, which in themselves have energy efficiency standards within them. But again, we think they're not as stringent as they need to be. Then if we think about what are the regulations that are in place to encourage householders or homeowners to improve the energy performance of their home, the other one is for the private rented sector. So there is something called the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standard, or MEES, which means that properties need to reach at least band E before they can be rented through the private rented sector. But again, this is quite a low level of efficiency, and it's also a standard that's quite difficult to monitor and regulate. Then finally, social housing. So many householders will be living in social housing, and often social housing actually has the highest energy performance across the housing stock. And the social housing sector has a target for their houses to reach the EPC level of C by 2030. So these are some of the regulations we do have in place currently, but again, it's definitely felt that there's a policy void in terms of really pushing strong retrofit. The second challenge is a lack of a stable funding framework. If anyone's tried to retrofit their home over the last decade, you will know this, that the funding environment has changed a lot. So there was the Green Deal and then the Green Homes Grant, both of which were quite disastrous. And the current funding picture is a bit mixed. So the kind of instability of funding in itself is a barrier because householders don't necessarily feel secure in terms of what funding is available to them, but also the retrofit industry in itself. So all of the tradespeople who are going to be installing these measures in themselves don't feel like there's enough security of funding available to invest in doing more retrofit work. Again, as I said, there's a supply chain scale issue. So there's a lack of trades, a lack of skills, and a lack of suppliers. So the UK's retrofitting industry really needs to grow by 10 times its current size if the UK is to meet its targets to decarbonise its housing stock. And currently, there's a real lack of trades and skills and a lack of kind of training provision and continuity. So that's a really big barrier. And if you are a householder yourself, or if you know of homes that have tried to retrofit their homes, they will have experienced likely difficulty getting materials, difficulty booking in good tradespeople to actually make the changes to themselves, to their homes. And then, of course, household concerns and barriers. So those concerns and barriers link themselves to lack of a strong policy framework, lack of stable funding framework, and again, the supply chain scale issues. But that in itself is a key barrier at the bottom line to get householders to actually make changes to their homes. They will have barriers and concerns around making those changes. And this is something that we will look further to in Unit 3. So now that we've talked about some of the broader challenges to retrofit in the UK, I wanted to start by going through what we call retrofit principles. And by this, I mean that before going into the detail of the different types of measures that you could install in your home, which we will cover in Unit 2, this is about thinking about the approach that you take and the order in which you may do things. So there are 3 key principles that I want to go through. The first is maintenance first. The second is the whole house approach. And the third is the energy hierarchy, or what you might have heard of a phrase called fabric first. So I'll go through each of these in turn. So maintenance first. So basic maintenance lets your building or your home work effectively. So simply maintaining your home is a key way you can start to increase both the comfort in your home and the fuel efficiency of the building, because it allows the building to work as effectively as possible. So let's think of an example. For example, if you have rotten windows, which will be letting drafts in and heat out, or cracks in the guttering, which may mean that you get damp spots on the render, all of those things need to be tackled before you make any retrofit changes to your home. So we say that the maintenance makes the building retrofit ready. And if you don't do this maintenance or tackle existing issues relating to maintenance, then you run the risk of undoing the work that gets done to the home. So maintenance first is the first overarching principle. The second one is what we call the whole house approach. So it's important to understand the home or the building before decision-making starts. So a home is comprised of different elements, for example, how it was built, how it's been adapted over time, and what materials have been used in both of those stages, how the building is used, and what are the surrounds like. For example, how exposed is it, or does it have shading from a neighbouring tree? So the whole house approach sees the home as a whole system and not looking at just a disconnected part of it. And it helps you to think through and, importantly, to plan which measures to prioritise in terms of gains in energy efficiency. And also to make sure that if you're making changes in one part of the building, that's not negatively impacting upon another part. So a key part of taking the whole house approach is also about risk management. And we can think of an example. Say, for example, in a more traditional home, which would have been built using more natural materials and designed in a way which lets oxygen in and out. So older homes are naturally more drafty. And that was because of how they were used. So, for example, they were more reliant on fires for cooking and for heating. So it was important that the bad air could easily leave the home. So that ventilation was built into the home, and it was kind of necessary for how those homes were lived in the past. So making changes to the ventilation of an old home will impact, for example, might have impacts, for example, on damp in the home or the ability for the home to breathe. So it's just really important to think about what kind of home do you live in? What is it made of? How do you use the home? What are the surrounds like? Before you start to make changes, even if you're just making one small change, this might impact upon the home in the broader context. And then the third principle is the energy hierarchy. So you might be familiar with the energy hierarchy. And the theory in terms of retrofit is this is the order in which you should make changes to the home. This is the ideal order. So we start with energy saving. So that's reducing the energy demand of a home before making any changes. So we mean behavioural changes such as closing curtains, turning down the thermostat if you're able to, not wasting energy, turning the lights off, keeping outside doors closed to keep the warm in, and making best use of the existing controls that you have in your home. And we'll be going through that more in Unit 2. So these are usually the most cost-effective changes, and they're really important as a starting point before you actually make changes to the building fabric. So the next step down in the energy hierarchy is the building fabric. So this is the kind of fabric first approach. When you're making changes to your home, you start with the fabric. So this is about maximizing the performance of the bits, the components and the materials that make up the building fabric. So that might be the walls, the doors, the windows, the roof, the floors, before you're thinking about, for example, changing the heating system. So the next step down is what we call building services. And this is basically how you heat your home and how you heat your water. So changing the way you get hot water and heat. And then, of course, as part of that, you'll also want to be thinking about ventilation, whether you want to install any mechanical ventilation systems. And then the final step is looking at renewable energy. So actually generating renewables, for example, by putting solar PV on your roof. It's also really important to think about the energy that is being bought into the home. So is your supplier a green energy supplier? And we know that in reality, there might be reasons for why the energy hierarchy isn't followed. So maybe your boiler suddenly breaks and you need to quickly think about changing your heating system. Or maybe your home has a heritage significance, maybe it's listed, and therefore you can't do, for example, some of the more fabric-based approaches. Or maybe there's funding available for you to put PV on the roof. So we know that there'll be reasons why you won't follow the energy hierarchy, but this is the ideal order in which you should tackle the retrofit of a home. And stressing why fabric first. So just to remind ourselves, in terms of that energy hierarchy, why are we stressing that fabric first is how you should prioritize? So we know that in an average home, as I said before, the majority of our energy use is for space heating. And then after that, water heating. So that's why reducing how much heat our homes use is the first critical step before looking, for example, to decarbonize the heat. And to reduce the heat demand of our homes, it's good to think about where is the heat lost in the home. So we can see here that lots of the heat is lost through the walls, 35%, 25% is lost through the roof, and then you have also heat loss through the floor, the windows and doors, and then drafts. So we know that we need to reduce the heat demand of our homes and reduce how much they leak heat. And we can see from this diagram where it's good to prioritize activity. So just to remind the retrofit principles that I've gone through. So it's maintenance first, taking the whole house approach, and following the energy hierarchy where possible. So now that we've got a bit of an understanding of some of those overarching principles, how does a household actually know where to start? And we really recommend householders look at the different kinds of retrofit surveys and assessments that you can have done. So this is a good place for a householder to start. And there are different types of survey and assessment that you can get done, which bring with them different levels of cost, different levels of detail, and then of course, different levels of expertise. And one way in which a householder can start is by doing a self-completed audit. So there are kind of forms that you can get online, which basically take you through your house and ask you lots of questions about the windows, the doors, the floors, the heating system. So it can be a nice thing for a householder to do because it encourages them to look at their home and think about where is it inefficient before engaging professional assessors or people in the building trade. It can also highlight some of those no and low cost changes that you can make that fit into that top band of the energy hierarchy, which is around energy saving. Then in terms of professional retrofit assessments, you can have an EPC report done. So lots of homes will already have EPC reports. I think about 60% of homes have them. So it's good to check if your home already has one. But if it doesn't, a householder might consider getting one done. So this might be, for example, for smaller and lower risk improvements. We say that EPC reports are quite a crude way of understanding the thermal performance of a home. So they're a good starting point. But if you want to make quite significant changes to your home, we recommend getting more detailed assessments. And if you want to look at whether your home already has an EPC, you can look on this government website. So www.gov.uk/find energy certificate. And if you put in your postcode and your address, it'll show you your energy certificate for your home. This in itself can actually be quite a good engagement tool. So if you're in your community talking to people about retrofit, you can start by looking up their home and seeing if their home has an EPC certificate already in place, which will bring with it some basic levels of recommendations for the changes that a householder can make. So EPCs. The next one is thermal imaging surveys. So thermal imaging surveys show where heat is leaking from in your home. And if you get a full retrofit assessment done, they might have a thermal imaging component within it. So it's useful information for householders when thinking about how to tackle the efficiency of the home, because you can really clearly see where heat is being lost from the home. It can also, in some cases, be good evidence for a householder to have if they're trying to encourage, for example, their private landlord or their social housing provider to make improvements to the home. And some community organisations and councils will have cameras to loan. For example, South Somerset District Council have thermal imaging cameras that residents can borrow from their libraries. You can also buy an attachment for your mobile phone. It's not as high quality as a full proper thermal imaging camera, but it can be a kind of lower cost option. And it's a very effective way to encourage householders to make improvements. So research has shown that where you give advice and information to a householder, if you supplement that with thermal imaging, a thermal imaging survey or images, that in itself can have a really big impact on encouraging the householder to actually make the changes to their home. Another option is a house condition survey. So if a householder has bought their home, they're likely to have got one of these done at the buying stage. So the house condition survey kind of tells you about the current condition of the home. And this is really good information to ensure, for example, that you're doing all of that maintenance work that needs to be done first. So it's really best to avoid starting any expensive retrofit changes if actually there are some key maintenance improvement works that need to happen first. So a householder might already have a house condition survey, and that can be a good place to start. We recommend that if a householder is looking to make quite significant changes to their home, that they get a detailed home retrofit assessment done. So this is the most accurate way of understanding the most suitable improvements for your home. And this type of survey will be done by a skilled and experienced retrofit assessor, and it will tell you about what improvements are the best for your homes, what the bill reductions might be and carbon emission reductions will be. It will also consider things like whether your existing ventilation system is adequate, and it should be tailored to your property. So it's not generic, it will be tailored to your property, to your needs and circumstances. And we really recommend householders get one of these done if they're thinking of making significant changes to their home. And again, in terms of getting retrofit surveys and assessments done, especially when you're getting a more detailed one done, a key thing is thinking about how you find an independent and trusted assessor. So this is really critical because this is like the start of the retrofit journey. So finding someone who does a good job and who you trust is really important. So I just wanted to say something about how you find a good retrofit professional. And some organisations will be able to offer all of the different stages of your retrofit journey. So they'll be able to offer the assessment, as well as having a designer and maybe even installers, all a part of the same organisation. So in terms of finding a good retrofit professional, there are some quality management standards that you can look at. For example, Trustmark, which is the government endorsed quality scheme that covers where you're making changes to your home. There's also MCS, which is the microgeneration certificate scheme. That's for if you're thinking, for example, of installing PV on your home. And there's also a retrofit professional standard called PAS 2030 or PAS 2035, which is the most up-to-date one. And this is the British standard for installing energy efficiency measures into a home. So those are some of the standards that a householder can look to. But we also say that remember that having those standards is not necessarily a guarantee of good quality. So we say that the best thing to do is to do some research into the installer or the assessor. So make sure they're reputable, make sure they have a strong track record. Even the best thing is even to speak to other householders who have had those professionals do work for them. So many small scale contractors and sole traders might not have the administrative capacity to get these certifications or these trademarks, but they might do a really high quality job. So once a householder has an assessment or even has some advice from an assessor, it's really good to be able to speak with householders about what funding is available to support them. So is there funding available to householders to actually make changes, retrofit changes to their home? So this can be a key barrier for households, kind of not really knowing where to start, and that's why an assessment is done, and then not really feeling like they maybe have the money to make those changes. So in terms of funding for householders, there is funding available to help householders retrofit their home. And these kind of come in two key areas. So what we call households that have a lower income, so less than 31,000, and then funding available for householders with a higher household income. And in terms of households with lower than 31,000, these are generally the funds that are available. So apologies for the acronyms, but LAD is the first one. So that stands for Local Area Delivery Scheme. And this is funding that's come through central government, but is delivered through your local authority. And the LAD funding scheme aims to improve the energy efficiency of poor performance homes and low income homes. And these are homes that are mostly on the gas grid, and it's delivered through your local authority. Another one is called HUGS, Home Upgrade Grant. And this is more focused at homes that are off the gas grid, but again, low income. And that's funding that's available, again, to improve the energy efficiency of the home, and where there's extra funding, for example, to upgrade the heating system or install solar panels. So that's available to homeowners and to renters. Again, needs to be applied for through the local authority. Other funding, for example, is the energy company obligation, which we call the latest round is Eco4. And this is money that comes from the energy companies, and it's administered through Ofgem. And then there are area-specific funds. So if there are energy advice organisations that operate in your community, they should know about all of these different funding pots. So it's not that you need to know about all of the detail, but it's just good to be aware that when you're doing community engagement work, to be able to say that there is funding available depending on what your household income is and what kind of home you live in. So do you own it? Do you privately rent it? And then there are also funds available for householders with higher than £30,000 a year. So one of them is the boiler upgrade scheme. So this is if you're looking to change your heating system, up until 2025, there's a £5,000 contribution towards the cost of a heat pump or a biomass boiler. So you need to own your own property to access that. There's also a thing called Smart Export Guarantee. So that's if you're going to install solar panels, for example, on your roof. So that's just where you get paid for the electricity that you are exporting back to the grid. And then there are also examples of low interest loans. So in some areas, for example, in the southwest, there's an organisation called Lendology, which works with local authorities in the southwest to offer householders low interest loans to help fund energy efficiency measures. So the funding picture at the moment does very much focus more on the lower income and the least efficient householders. And there will be groups in the kind of householders in the middle that have higher than £30,000 household salary, if you like, but also don't really have the funds available to make improvements to their home. So just to remind what we've covered in this unit, we went over some of the broader context and key challenges, some of the key principles of retrofit, which was looking at maintenance, the whole house approach and the energy hierarchy. Then thinking about some of the retrofit surveys and assessments that a householder can have for their home, and then thinking about what the funding landscape is. So are there funds available to support householders? And in Unit 2, we'll be looking at measures and technologies, And in Unit 3, we'll be looking at community engagement. So what are some of the activities that you can do to engage those in your community on Retrofit? So hopefully you will join me in Unit 2.